He stared at the pregnancy tests like it was a bomb I'd planted. And then, without even looking at me, he muttered, "So this is how you keep me, huh?" I didn't say anything at first. My brain couldn't catch up to the sheer stupidity of the sentence. The silence in the bathroom felt so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. Then I asked flatly, "What did you just say?" Greg finally looked up, eyes cold and small. "Don't play dumb, Ava. You stopped taking the pill without telling me, didn't you? You planned this." My mouth actually dropped open. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd I didn't know what else to do. We had talked about this multiple times. He was the one who brought up having kids. He said he didn't want to be an old dad. Said he'd rather start sooner than later. Said he trusted me. And now, here he was, accusing me of baby-trapping him like I was some desperate groupie trying to lock down a rock star. As if he wasn't the one who had asked me, specifically, to stop using birth control because, in his words, if it happens, it happens. I should have walked out right then. I should have packed a bag, slammed the door, and never looked back. But instead, I stood there, still holding the damn test in my shaking hand, and said something I didn't even know was sitting on my tongue until it came out. "If you weren't so old, Greg, we could have waited." His face darkened instantly, but I didn't care. I was done playing the sweet, supportive girlfriend who tiptoed around his fragile ego. Greg is 39. I'm 28. The age gap never bothered me at first. He was stable, thoughtful, emotionally mature, or so I thought. I liked that he had a plan. I liked that he wasn't some flaky 20-something playing video games all day. I liked that he said he wanted a real life with me. But that day in the bathroom, everything changed. Because it turns out, all that maturity was conditional. And when things stopped being convenient for him, the mask slipped. He called me manipulative, irresponsible, selfish, said I ruined his life. I remember looking at him, this man I'd loved for nearly 2 years, and thinking, how quickly they turn when it's no longer about them. I didn't even cry. Not that day. I just walked out of the bathroom, sat down on the couch, and stared at the wall for what felt like hours. I kept replaying our conversations in my head, trying to find the moment where I'd misread everything. Was I blind, naive, stupid, or was he just a coward? I wish I could say that was the worst of it, that he came to his senses, apologized, and said he was just scared. But this story gets worse. Much worse. Because Greg didn't just accuse me of trapping him. He told his friends, his coworkers, and then, God help me, he told his mother. And when I refused to terminate the pregnancy, he said something I'll never forget. "Fine, but don't expect me to be there when it comes out." That's when I realized I wasn't just losing a boyfriend. I was losing everything I thought we were. When I first met Greg, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. He was everything the guys my age weren't. Calm, stable, and actually listened when I talked. We met at a networking event. He was giving a keynote on sustainable brand strategy, and I was there as part of my firm's junior marketing team. After the talk, I complimented him on a line about authenticity and branding, and instead of brushing me off like most older men did, he turned and asked me, "What's your take?" I was floored. And flattered. We grabbed coffee the next day, and before the week was out, we were texting every night. He was charming without being pushy. Successful, but not arrogant. He said he liked my ambition, that it made him feel young again. Looking back, that should have been a red flag. But at the time, I was just glad someone saw me. Really saw me. As a grown woman with ideas, not just some 20-something figuring things out. Greg had been through a divorce a few years prior. No kids, thankfully, though he mentioned his ex didn't want a family like he did. He said they grew apart, said he was ready to build something real again. I believed him. The first year was good. Better than good. We took trips to the coast, cooked together on Sundays, even got matching toothbrush holders like some sitcom couple. He'd leave sticky notes on the fridge, "You'll crush it today," or "Dinner's on me tonight." And I'd melt like a teenager. He'd talk about the future in these casual, almost hypnotic ways. "When we have kids, I want to take them hiking before they can walk. I hope our daughter gets your laugh. I'll be 45 when our kid's in kindergarten. I don't want to be the ancient dad with knee problems." It was subtle, but constant. The kind of narrative that seeps into your bones and makes you think, yeah, this is happening. This is safe. At one point, about 10 months in, he brought up birth control. Not in a creepy, controlling way, at least not at first. He just said he didn't love the idea of hormones, and that if I ever wanted to stop, he'd be totally on board with whatever made me feel healthiest. I was on the pill, and it hadn't given me problems, but I remember thinking, wow, he really cares about my body. So I told him I'd think about it. Over time, the conversation evolved. He'd say things like, if it happens, it happens. We're both adults. It's not like we'd be upset. You know I want a family with you, right? Eventually, I stopped the pill. I told him first, made it clear I wasn't ready yet, but that we'd use other methods until we both felt solid about the timing. He kissed me, told me he trusted me, and said, this feels right. And for a while, it did. Until it didn't. The shift was subtle at first. He got moodier, more withdrawn, started making comments about his work stress, about how everyone wanted a piece of him and how he needed more space. I tried to be understanding. I didn't press. I didn't whine. I thought it was just burnout. But then he started treating me like a responsibility, not a partner. No more sticky notes, no more slow Sunday mornings, just silence and avoidance. The intimacy dropped off too. When I asked what was going on, he shrugged and said, I've got a lot on my mind. When I suggested therapy, he scoffed. When I told him I felt him pulling away, he said, you're imagining things. That phrase stuck with me. You're imagining things. Like I was crazy, like my instincts didn't matter. And then, 2 months later, I missed a period. I didn't panic. Not at first. I took a test alone one morning before he woke up, mostly to ease my nerves. But when the lines appeared, bold, pink, undeniable, I just sat there, blinking at the counter. I wasn't excited, I wasn't scared. I was blank. Because somewhere deep in my gut, I already knew how Greg would react. Still, I told myself to trust him, to believe that the man who once said, you'll be the best mom, would show up for this. I waited until after dinner that night, made him tea, turned off the TV, sat beside him and said, Greg, I'm pregnant. His face didn't shift at first. He didn't smile, didn't blink. He just said, are you sure? I nodded. He looked down at his mug, then back at me. Did you do this on purpose? And just like that, the entire foundation cracked. Everything he'd ever said, every promise, every whispered someday, they all dissolved under that one line. He saw me not as a partner, but as a threat. I didn't fight back right away. I didn't even cry. Because when someone shows you what they really think of you, you don't argue. You just remember it. I thought the worst part was over after he accused me. I was wrong. It wasn't just what Greg said to me that night. It was everything he said after, to everyone else. The version of the story he carried out into the world made me out to be some desperate, manipulative child, trying to secure a future I couldn't build on my own. I found out through a mutual friend, Max. We weren't especially close, but he called me 2 days after the pregnancy bomb dropped. Hey, he said, awkwardly. I don't mean to pry, but are you okay? I asked what he meant, and that's when he told me that Greg had been venting to people at work, that he'd said I'd stop taking the pill without telling him, that I'd been acting weird for weeks, that I'd trapped him. He said you wanted to lock it down before he realized what he was missing. I couldn't breathe. Not because I cared what Greg's coworkers thought, but because this wasn't just betrayal. This was defamation, and it wasn't accidental. He was crafting a narrative. Worse, he told his mother. And she, this sharp, cold woman I'd only met twice, called me directly. No hello, no preamble. I hope you're prepared for what's coming. Greg has options. Don't think this baby guarantees anything. I didn't say a word. I just hung up and threw my phone across the room. After that, Greg and I barely spoke. We were still living in the same apartment, but he'd sleep on the couch or disappear to crash at a friend's. The few times we crossed paths, it was like living with a ghost. He wouldn't look me in the eye, wouldn't acknowledge my nausea, my doctor's visits, my silences. I felt like a stranger in my own home. I tried once, just once, to have a civil conversation. I made dinner, lit a stupid candle, and sat across from him like we were two polite acquaintances. I'm not asking for anything from you, I said. But I'm keeping the baby. You don't have to be involved, but I'd like to figure out a plan. He didn't even look up from his phone. Talk to my lawyer. That was it. No apology, no curiosity, no care. A week later, I found a pamphlet on the kitchen table. One of those cheap, glossy ones you get at clinics. your options. The kind of thing handed to scared teenagers and overwhelmed single moms. There was a post-it note on top. Still time. It wasn't signed, but I knew his handwriting. I felt something inside me break. Not my heart, not even my trust. Something older, something deeper. A root of belief that I was still worth defending, worth protecting. It died right there, next to that pamphlet. The next few weeks were a blur. I started sleeping at Emily's. She was my best friend from college, fiery, fierce, and allergic to bullshit. When I told her everything, she didn't blink. "You're not staying with that man," she said. "I'll buy you prenatal vitamins and a taser if I have to." She cleared out her guest room, set me up with extra pillows and a mini fridge full of Gatorade. She even came with me to my first appointment. Held my hand while the ultrasound tech found the tiny flickering heartbeat. That was the moment it hit me. This was real. This wasn't a crisis, it was a person. And they deserved better than Greg. Meanwhile, Greg's smear campaign continued. He'd unfollowed me on everything, but I started getting messages. From old friends, from acquaintances, from people I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey, just checking in, I heard some things and didn't want to assume. Greg said you guys were on a break?" "Wait, you're pregnant?" I wanted to scream. But instead, I took a deep breath and posted one thing on Instagram, a black and white photo of the ultrasound. Captioned simply, "Coming soon." No drama, just truth. That post got more support than I expected. More silence from Greg than I deserved. And one comment that made me cry, "You're going to be an incredible mom." And then came the tipping point. Greg emailed me a contract. Yes, a contract. It stated that if I chose to go through with the pregnancy, he would waive parental rights, refuse any financial responsibility, and in return, I could never make a public statement about him being the father. It was pure reputation management. He didn't care about me, or the baby, or what had happened between us. He cared about his name. I didn't even finish reading it. I just forwarded it to a lawyer Emily found through her cousin, and then I blocked his number. That night, I stood in the bathroom alone, again, staring at my reflection. I looked tired, pale, slightly hollowed out. But there was something else there too. Steel. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a woman who had finally stopped waiting to be saved. There's something strangely liberating about hitting emotional rock bottom. You stop trying to win. You stop waiting for someone to do the right thing. You stop apologizing for existing. After I blocked Greg and sent the contract to my lawyer, I felt still, like the water had finally stopped churning, even if I was treading it alone. There were no more illusions left to protect, just me, my body, and this tiny heartbeat inside me. That's when I realized I didn't need Greg. I needed me. The version of me that had been buried under compromise, under pleasing, under silence. And she was clawing her way back up. Emily became my unofficial doula, therapist, and co-conspirator. She printed out a calendar and color-coded every doctor's appointment, helped me apply for a temporary leave of absence from my firm using my stored-up vacation days, sent me links to cheap sublets in my neighborhood for when I'd be ready to move out of her place. She never once said, "I told you so." She just said, "You've got this." Sometimes that's all it takes. I also started journaling again. I hadn't written in months. Greg thought it was a waste of time. "You're not 15, he used to joke. "If you want to vent, talk to me." But that was the point, wasn't it? There was never space for my voice unless it was filtered through his ears. Now, every night I filled page after page, not with anger, though God knows I had plenty, but with clarity. I wrote letters to my baby, to myself, to the woman I wanted to be. I wrote down everything I wished someone had told me. You don't need a man to validate your motherhood. You can be scared and still be brave. Let go of the version of love that taught you to shrink. At 15 weeks, I told my parents. They're traditional, Catholic, love Greg, or loved, past tense. I had been dreading this conversation for weeks, but when I told them, on a quiet Saturday morning over FaceTime, my mom blinked a few times, took a breath and said, "Do you want us to come down this weekend?" And just like that, I cried for the first time in a long time. My dad was quieter. He didn't ask about Greg, didn't ask about the baby's father at all. He just said, "You'll be a better parent than most kids ever get." Things weren't easy, of course. There were moments I wanted to scream when the nausea hit too hard, or I caught a glimpse of an old photo of us and remembered how much I used to love him. But those moments passed, like storms, and each time I was stronger on the other side. I moved into a small studio apartment at 19 weeks. It smelled like old paint, and the heater clanked at night, but it was mine. I bought a second-hand crib, hung fairy lights above the window, made a Spotify playlist called "We're Gonna Be Okay," and played it every time I felt the doubts creeping in. I didn't need perfection. I needed peace. One night, while organizing a drawer of donated baby clothes, I found an old Polaroid stuck between pages of a book I hadn't opened in months. It was from a weekend trip Greg and I took to Joshua Tree. He was smiling, squinting into the sun, his arm around me, that stupid trucker hat perched backwards on his head. For a moment I stared at it and almost felt nostalgic. Then I flipped it over. In his handwriting it read, "Let's make little versions of us someday." And just like that, the sadness turned to fire. Because someday had arrived, and he ran. Because he said those words, and I believed him, and then he acted like I'd invented the whole dream alone. So I burned the photo, literally, took it outside, lit a match, and watched it curl into black ash on the pavement. Then I went back inside, placed a hand on my belly, and whispered, "You're not a trap. You're my freedom." At my 20-week anatomy scan, the tech asked if I wanted to know the sex. I almost said no. Then I nodded. "It's a girl," she smiled. "Strong heartbeat, beautiful spine." I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just smiled. Because suddenly, I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for a girl who would grow up watching me choose herself. Watching me rebuild. Watching me show up even when no one else would. Greg reached out again at 32 weeks. I hadn't seen his name pop up on my phone in months. It was just a short text, no greeting, no apology. "We should talk." I stared at it for a full 5 minutes. Emily glanced over and raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, Captain Coward's finally remembering he has a spine?" I didn't reply to him right away. I sat with it. Not because I was uncertain, but because I was calm. And calm deserves time. That weekend I agreed to meet. Neutral location. Daytime. Public. We chose a quiet park near the old apartment. He looked older. Not just physically, something in his face had crumpled. He gave me a stiff nod, like we were strangers meeting for a business deal. I didn't offer a smile. He sat, fidgeted. Finally said, "You look, well." I looked at my belly, now round and unmistakably inhabited. "She does too." That stopped him. His mouth twitched like he wanted to say something, maybe ask if I was serious. But he didn't. He just exhaled and said, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened." I didn't interrupt. I let him speak, for once. He went on about his childhood, how his own father left, how fear took over, how he convinced himself I'd set him up because it was easier than admitting he'd walked into this willingly. How embarrassed he felt, how exposed, how old. And how he told people those lies because he thought if he said it first, it wouldn't hurt as much when it was true. I waited. Let the words hang between us like wet clothes on a line, heavy, damp, uncomfortable. Finally, I asked, "And what do you want now?" His eyes met mine. "I want to be part of her life." I nodded slowly. "And what happens the next time fear shows up?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then said the most honest thing I think I've ever heard from him. "I don't know." That was the moment I knew I'd already made my decision. I didn't scream, I didn't guilt trip, I didn't weaponize the past. I just told him calmly, "She deserves stability. Not maybes. Not apologies in the form of last-minute appearances. You had your chance to show up when it mattered. You chose silence. I chose her." He nodded, took it like a man who finally understood what he lost. Not just a relationship but respect. We parted without drama. He didn't beg, I didn't burn, it was quiet. And for once, Greg didn't try to control the narrative. He just walked away. A month later, I gave birth. It was long, messy, real. Emily was there the whole time. She cut the cord. Played "Here Comes the Sun" on her phone when my daughter took her first breath. I named her June, after my grandmother. After the month, everything blooms. She had a full head of dark hair and eyes that stared at me like she already knew who I was. I cried. Not out of fear. Not out of pain. But because in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Now, June is 3 months old and already smiling like she's in on the world's biggest secret. I still have rough nights. Sometimes I lie awake wondering what she'll ask one day about her father. What I'll say? what I won't, but I'll tell her this. You were never a mistake. You were never a trap. You were never a burden. You were the moment I remembered who I am. And when she's older, when she's ready, I'll tell her the rest. But for now, she just needs love. And I've got enough of it for both of us.